Welcome back everyone to Formula 1 2021 and welcome to your race review for the 2021 Dutch Grand Prix. It's been 35 years since our last race here in the sand dunes at Zandvoort. Niki Lauda was your race victor last time out in 1985, but could home hero Max Verstappen on pole position yesterday in qualifying, could he convert it to his first race victory on home soil? As always, if you are new, feel free to subscribe. A spoiler warning is in effect for today's race results. If you've not seen it, go and watch the highlights and then come back to the race review for all of your discussion about today's events and dramas. But without further ado, spoiler warning out of the way, here is your result for today's race. And indeed, it was Super Max yesterday in qualifying, and in today's race, Mercedes, crikey, did they making work for it, but Max Verstappen is victorious at Zandvoort, and with Lewis Hamilton in second place, even though he scored the fastest lap, Verstappen now takes the lead of the drivers' standings. With Bottas in third place, kind of out of the race victory running today. It was very much the Verstappen and Hamilton show once again today in 2021. But with that third place for Bottas, Mercedes just about hold on to the constructors' standings lead. Into the midfield then, and we saw plenty of fights up and down this group. However, Pierre Gasly held on from lap 1 to the finish to fourth place. A great drive again from the Frenchman. That Alfa car really shining in the sand dunes this weekend. Leclerc, P5, had a chance late on to overtake Gasly, but his tyres fell away on the alternate strategy to the Frenchman. But though Carlos Sainz spent much of the race in P6, Fernando Alonso, with just a few laps to go, overtaking his fellow Spaniard to score good points for the Alpine team. It's pit lane to point and a day's work for Sergio Perez. He had everything to do in today's race. A bit of contact with Lando Norris late on. He had a big lockup fighting Nikita Mazepin at the start of the race. Everything. Can't wait to talk about his race when we get to our race rundown in a moment's time. Hungarian Grand Prix race winner Esteban Ocon was 9th. It's 2 points for the Frenchman, but I think it could have been more today. Another one I want to talk about a little bit later on. And your final point today, out in Q2 for the first time in 2021, but a great overcut strategy gives Norris the final point in P10. He started 10th but couldn't quite hold on, relinquishing 10th place to teammate Norris. Ricciardo finishes 11th place. Unlucky to not score points today, but that McLaren wasn't particularly quick and traffic hurt a lot of these drivers that didn't make it through to the points. Stroll, probably the driver of the race that got caught in the most traffic behind Russell for the vast majority of it. Russell was in 12th, however retired late on and ultimately finished P17. Vettel, another driver in the wars, a spin in turn 3 halfway through the Grand Prix. Early on went on to an audacious long undercut strategy. Didn't work out, no points at all for the Aston Martin team today. It's the two Alfa Romeo boys, Giovinazzi 7th in quali, but couldn't get that big return he was hoping for, finishing P14, and Robert Kubica deputising for Kimi Raikkonen is P15. Latifi is your final finisher technically in 16th place, with George Russell retiring in 17th, Mick Schumacher 3 laps down in 18th, and Yuki Tsunoda and Nikita Mazepin both failing to finish, and rounds out your field. And as we move over to our race rundown, of course, there's nowhere else to start but Max Verstappen and Red Bull Racing. Yesterday, pole position just less than a 10th in front of Lewis Hamilton, but with Sergio Perez qualifying 16th but starting from the pit lane, taking a new gearbox as part of a overarching longer strategy for the rest of the season, Verstappen was very much on his own to fight the two Mercedes, converting to a two-stop strategy when their hand really was forced by Mercedes, with Hamilton coming in early. Also converting to the two-stop, they had the luxury of leaving Bottas out on the one-stop, and Verstappen had to make that move down into turn 1, had a great pace advantage, but knew at that stage of the race an overtake was critical. The final stop came in a little bit earlier than either Verstappen or Hamilton most likely would have liked it to have been. However, with Verstappen not having a single new set of fresh mediums, Hamilton had a scrub set, so he'd only done a couple of laps over the weekend. There was a slight worry that maybe from a Red Bull side of things, Hamilton would be able to catch on that tyre advantage. Thankfully for them, he was unable to do so. And though Verstappen doesn't come away with the fastest lap, Mercedes, that's a whole drama we'll get into in a moment's time. It's still a great day for them. They fended off the two charging silver arrows. It's victory on home soil for Verstappen and a perfect day in his eyes. Red Bull don't take the lead of the constructors, and mostly that's down to Sergio Perez this weekend, who finally scores points for the first time since Austria, so he's got that monkey off his back. However, his initial strategy, his long overcut on the hard tyres, which I do think would have been an awesome way to go today. Just look at Lando Norris and his pace advantage he had doing the overcut. If Sergio Perez hadn't have locked up and ruined that set of hards while trying to overtake Nikita Mazepin of all people, I think he could have been even higher today. Of course, he kept on going, and actually the resulting recovery was brilliant. Oh my god, did this man just make overtakes here, there and everywhere. Yes, they were slower cars. Yes, they were midfield cars, but just having that guts to keep on going after what was a really disappointing start to the weekend, hats off to him. It got very close with Lando Norris in those closing stages on his way to 8th place, and sadly Formula 1 did not show the fight between Perez, Ocon, Sainz and Alonso in those final couple of laps. Most likely we're going to have to wait a couple of days to see that one. However, the fight with Norris was on the edge, Lando forcing Perez out wide, just leaving Checo enough room. If Checo had just gone out a little bit wider, they probably would have had no contact, but if Norris had hugged the inside more, there definitely would have been no contact. And clearly, in my opinion, as a result, this is a racing incident. Both of them continued, both of them were fine. Yes, Norris lost a place, but at the end of the day, this is what you want to see. It's right on the edge, it's hard, aggressive racing from both of them. And so no penalties, no investigation from the FIA, for me, is definitely the right decision. 8th place, a great recovery, but as we head into this final stage of the season, Checo is going to have to cut out these mistakes, try and clean up his act. He's got that contract for next year, but Gasly was 4th today. They definitely had a car quick enough than everyone else in that midfield. Is 8th place good enough? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, but victory for Verstappen, Red Bull will be delighted. And really, I've kind of, in talking with Red Bull, discussed Mercedes' strategy of trying their best to force Red Bull's hand to move into that two-stop strategy. There was thoughts that they might try a 3-stop late on. They did end up doing that for the fastest lap, but in strategy terms, it was a 2-stop race for Mercedes. They weren't quite able to have that little bit extra pace advantage on the fresh tyres to undercut Verstappen. Bottas really unlucky with that Vettel spin, losing time and not really able to get in front of Verstappen for a second time. But from a Mercedes point of view, they gave it a really good go this weekend. They knew Verstappen had the ultimate pace of anyone on the grid. They knew Red Bull was certainly the team to beat. So to come pretty close to victory, to come away with the fastest lap, 2 drivers on the podium and a points advantage overall over Red Bull in the constructors, isn't too bad. Of course, the crown jewel, the Drivers' Championship, they will know they've lost out to Verstappen. They know there's races that are coming up that could suit their car a little bit more. And so this weekend, it's not the ultimate result they would have loved to have had. It's not that 100th victory in front of the home fans, but it's an okay day. Their frustration will come in Valtteri Bottas. Not in the fact he wasn't able to fight for the victory, though that's a story in itself, the fastest lap fiasco. I've got to mention it. It's silly because Hamilton did eventually come away with the point, but there was a moment there where it did get a little bit touch and go, with Bottas being told, don't go for the fastest lap, Valtteri. He went for it in sector 1 and 2, backed off in sector 3, but the pace advantage on those fresh tyres was so much, nicked it anyway. I'm sure there will be discussions. I don't want to read into it too much. It's quite amusing. Eventually Hamilton, of course, getting that fastest lap on the final lap of the race, but not a bad day for Mercedes overall. We then move into the midfield, and actually I think a good tell of whether a racetrack is a great track, a middle of the road track, is how good the midfield fight was. And I think today it was a little bit lacking because overtaking was so difficult, but I think those guys closer to the front, including this man on screen, Pierre Gasly, he won't be complaining. 4th place on paper is his second best result after that podium in Baku. I would argue this is his best result, because with only technically three drivers retiring today, 3 drivers that weren't involved at all in the fighting the points, to finish 4th in an Alfa Tauri is bonkers. That is so good to hold on in front of those 2 Ferraris. Again, overtaking was really difficult, and I think that has played a part in this. But does that prove that yesterday, the job he did in qualifying really was just that good? Credit where credit's due for Gasly once again, and for Yuki Tsunoda, a quiet day yesterday, got through to Q2, but today, an even quieter day, caught in that midfield, eventually ended in retirement. We're not quite sure just yet why it was, but a power unit failure of sorts is the only real explanation we've got so far, so it's not a great day for Tsunoda, but for AlphaTauri and Gasly, that's a real statement of intent. And again, you know I love my transfer talks. You know they're going to be coming thick and fast. Now the driver market's in full swing over the next few weeks. And there's really no denying at this point how good Gasly is. And this weekend has surely done him a few favours. Ferrari 5th and 7th. A quiet, lonely race really. There was an overcut strategy attempted with both cars. It almost worked out for Charles Leclerc, who ended up about 6 seconds off Gasly at the checkered flag, was closing in at quite a rate of knots until about 6 laps to go, where started backing off again, making sure he got to the checkered flag. And Carlos Sainz, who was pretty much with Leclerc in that group for the entirety of the race, eventually lost out to Alonso. And on a weekend where you were 5th and 6th the entirety until 2 laps to go, yeah, of course there's going to be some frustration, but it's points. It's not the end of the world, and more crucially for them, both cars finishing comfortably in front of the McLarens. Alonso and Ocon, it's a double points finish for Alpine. That doesn't happen all that often, but their pace looked really strong today. Really impressive from Alpine, that at one stage there was a little bit touch and go whether team orders should be used, and with Ocon in 9th, Alonso in 6th, Ocon had much better pace in that first stage of the race. I just wonder whether if they'd have swapped the cars round, there were 2 opportunities for it. The first was right at the start, after the first couple of laps had just settled down. Ocon looked to be the quicker of the 2, went for that great little move down the inside of turn 3. Didn't pay off, but he went for it nonetheless. We then had an opportunity a little bit later, just after they'd done their first stop. Again, Ocon seemed to be the man with the pace. But they didn't swap the cars, they let them race it out. Alonso was able to hold on and score that 6th place, but Ocon not so fortunate. It's 9th for him at the checkered flag, and I do think it just would have been worth a try, with other cars really benefiting from that fresh air, with Ocon so much quicker than Alonso at that stage of the race. He was the only guy pushing anyone on the circuit, and when you also factor in that drama-filled opening lap for the Alpine cars, Alonso flying around the outside of turn 3, taking a couple of cars in the action. Just before that, Alonso and Ocon made contact. It was only slight, but the 2 tyres banging into each other. Lucky to get away with that one. But Giovinazzi didn't have to come steaming into the back of Alonso as they went charging down the hill at turn 5. And I just wonder if that stage of the race, that bit of damage on the tyre of Alonso, on the rear of Alonso, again, I just think it was worth a gamble, worth a chance, putting Ocon in front. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And I do think Ocon will be frustrated, But either way, Alonso, his drive today was very admirable to come away with a 6th place, to overtake Sainz right at the end. It's classic Alonso. Some great moves in there, some great defensive work in there as well. Not a bad job from Alpine today. They also outscored McLaren, who come away with a singular point. A quiet day for Ricciardo, caught up in that midfield fight and was never really able to make any moves. Opportunities never came his way. Had that bit of an engine issue, didn't he? Right at the start of the Grand Prix as well. And I suppose the icing on the cake for Ricciardo today was that they didn't try anything brave on the strategy, because all their eggs were in Norris's basket, starting on those medium tyres, making him go super long, kind of using Ricciardo as a bit of a buffer to slow down Stroll, to slow down George Russell. It worked. They swapped the cars around. Norris was able to charge after Ocon, charge after Sergio Perez. We eventually had that contact with Checo I mentioned a little bit earlier on. It's a point. It's not a track they were thinking would be great for them. That's eventually what's happened in reality. But a point on a day like today, in a season like we've had so far, it could be crucial at the end of the season. And for Norris, who's technically still in the fight for the top 3, again, that 1 point looks silly now, but at the end of the year, it could be a very different story. Aston Martin, it's another really quiet day for Lance Stroll. Just like yesterday, his entirety of the race today was involved in studying a back of a Williams. George Russell's car was never able to make the overtake. Both of them stopped on the same lap as well to make things worse for Lance. Eventually Russell retired, and eventually 12th place was the best he could do. For Sebastian Vettel, a driver who was out in Q1 yesterday, eventually started in 16th place, made up a few places on the opening lap. But when his race really changed and fell apart really was that crazy long undercut strategy going on to the hards only about 10 laps into the Grand Prix. It didn't work out because Seb eventually had a bit of a spin, bit of a moment at turn 3. Lucky not to get collected by Valtteri Bottas or even find the wall at that stage of the race. 13th place, no points for Aston today. 14th and 15th is a day of 2 very different stories at Alfa Romeo. Giovinazzi, what can this man do to catch a break? 7th in qualifying, his best ever result in Formula 1. Early doors dropped back to 10th place, but it looks like there may be a chance. There may be a sniff. Of course, was involved in that early first lap contact with Alonso, and I thought for a moment there he's thrown it all away, but kept on going, kept up the momentum. But a puncture halfway through the race forced him onto a 2-stop strategy and was unable to get back into the points. A really unlucky day for Giovinazzi. And Robert Kubica, 15th place. That's not bad at all, considering he'd done no running this weekend until yesterday, has done very little running in the car so far this year. Yes, Giovinazzi had his issues, but to finish just 1 place behind Gio, I think Kubica can be pretty proud of that one. Well done for Robert. Overall, though, a disappointing day for Alfa Romeo. Williams, 16th, and a DNF for George Russell in 17th. George was on the fringes of the points, got a 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane. That's not great. Eventually, it didn't really matter, just like we saw in that first race in Austria this season, the Styrian Grand Prix. Issues on the power unit, served his 5-second penalty, then had to come in again a lap later and retire the car with just 2 laps to go. Unlucky for Williams, and it's the first time either driver haven't scored a point since Silverstone. So silver linings for Williams, and actually their race pace being able to stay in front of Lance Stroll. For Latifi, he got his elbows out early on, didn't he? A great move around the outside of Mazepin, I believe it was, with a couple of laps into the Grand Prix. He also had a pit lane start after that crash in quali yesterday. However, there's no denying, since the summer break, since that big result in Hungary, they just seem to have got better and better. But our final team, a team that don't really seem to be getting better and just cause their own headaches, is Haas. It's 18th for Schumacher, 3 laps down, a DNF for Mazepin. Schumacher, a quiet day, had a bit of a lock-up in Sector 2, running over the gravel at the stadium section halfway through the race, but it was a quiet day for Mick, except opening lap, Mazepin trying to steam his teammate into the pit wall. Why? We're on lap 1, it's not needed. We saw Mazepin then do a similar thing to Perez a little bit later on. It's disappointing. They're not in the race with everyone else. I know they want to prove what they're worth, but don't be stupid about it. Some really silly moves from Mazepin today. A DNF at the end, and Schumacher, again, a quiet day, finishing P18 and 3 laps down at the checkered flag. And that is it for your race rundown here in Zandvoort. But just before we go, let's take a look at your Drivers' and Constructors' Championships, as well as Driver of the Day and Race Rating. In the Drivers' Championship, Max Verstappen once again takes the lead, 3 points in front of Lewis Hamilton. Bottas moves up to 3rd place in front of Norris and Perez, but Charles Leclerc closes in on all of them. Could Leclerc be an outside shot of the top 3? It's 7th for Sainz. Gasly moves in front of Daniel Ricciardo in 8th. Fernando Alonso rounds out the top 10. 9th place today sees Ocon slip down to 11th. He's in front of Sebastian Vettel. Tsunoda and Stroll are on 18 points apiece in 13th and 14th. Both Williams cars 15th and 16th for Russell and Latifi. Raikkonen didn't race today, stays in 17th. Giovinazzi on 1, and Schumacher, Mazepin and Robert Kubica, who's not on screen, he can't quite fit, bless him, all yet to score in 2021. In the Constructors, Mercedes lead the way over Red Bull Racing, 12 points split the two, 11.5 Ferrari now in front of McLaren. Alpine are in front of Alfa Tauri, Aston Martin slipping away from that group now. Williams have 20, Alfa Romeo have 3, and Haas the only team yet to score. Race rating for today? It's a difficult one because the midfield was quiet, overtaking was so tricky, but certainly points for what an awesome circuit this is to witness cars flying around those banked corners. The crowd, the flares, the atmosphere really was something different, and what I always say, a strategy involved, intriguing race at the front is king. It was a middle of the road race for 2021. I'm gonna go a 6 out of 10. A little bit harsh, maybe it should be 7. I'm between 6 and 7, I'm gonna go 6, but let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And driver of the day, it's a tricky one. Yesterday I went with Antonio Giovinazzi. Today I'm gonna give it to Gasly in 4th place in an Alfa Tauri. 4th place with no issues. It's a great drive. I would say Norris, I would say Perez, but they did come together. That was a bit scruffy, and I think for Checo, that mistake in the early stages, it could have been a lot better today. But those 3 in the mix for me, I'm going to just go with Gasly, but undoubtedly, your driver of the weekend, of course, is Max Verstappen. Supreme in the conditions today, held off the incredible pressure of being at his home Grand Prix, and also just being expected to win. I think conducted himself brilliantly this weekend, and it's my Racing Reviews driver of the weekend. But that is it from me here in Zandvoort. I'm looking forward to coming back next year with cars that are a little bit easier to overtake, but what an atmosphere, what a circuit, what a venue. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. We'll be back next weekend in Monza. Sprint qualifying should be an epic. Thank you all very much for watching. If you are new, feel free to subscribe, and I hope to see you all in the next one.